get at. Again, the story gets deeper and more complicated, but let's focus on PP&E again, the heart of business. So Akamai spent $2 billion at some point on equipment. They have $2 billion of boxes. From this, they make $1 billion a year in cash. Think about how great that is. That is a wonderful return. That's a 50% return. Imagine you said, oh, well, I can come up with $2 billion. And if I come up, let's say, it does, maybe not you or me, but Ken Griffin could say, well, I'll come up with $2 billion. Would he make $1 billion? And he'd have all the same machines that Akamai would have. And of course, there's a reason they have $4 billion of revenue. They have relationships, they have sales and marketing, they have a brand name, all that stuff. So, it's not that easy. But fundamentally, you could actually create, just think about this in your mind, a carbon copy of Akamai with $2 billion. You could copy and paste it. Now, it would take years to sort of build it up to the business that they build it up to, but you wouldn't have a fundamentally different business. And I think that's the sort of the heart of things, because if your yield, you can think of it as a yield almost, and people will do different returns, but there's this idea of return on equity, and so equity is shareholders' equity, and so in this case it's 23%. You could do return on tangible equity, which is our return, which is free cash flow, and we're going to divide that by shareholders' equity minus the goodwill, and that's a hell of a return. You can do return on assets, same sort of calculation, and then you can do return on tangible assets. Again, minus the goodwill. So whichever metric you use, you sort of ask yourself, well, if they can get a 50% return, that's sort of, there's one called the Buffett return, which is my favorite. And this is something that is hidden away in a book that is like basically out of print. But Buffett disclosed his sort of favored metric for return, which is really interesting. And I have it written somewhere. I just don't want to mess it up. Yes, here we go. Okay, so the Buffett return is inventory, which this company does not have, plus fixed assets. So this is sort of what I was talking about, which is a 57% return. So I think that, it doesn't matter that much which return you use. I think the Buffett return crystallizes it pretty well. You may also want to add in accounts receivable because ultimately AR is capital that you've put out, basically. You may even want to add prepaids. I don't think you want to add the longer term stuff. So in any event, here's a company make a 57% yield. It's good and it's bad. It's such a high yield that AWS might say, hold on a second, I can buy some boxes. We have distribution. There's nothing that's stopping me from making a 57% return. That sounds great. Because keep in mind that to keep this up versus the depreciation, they have to put in another $390 every year. That's their capital expenditures. So maybe you want to add that too. What do you think? Maybe? Because they are depreciating this number. but you're also expensing it in depreciation and free cash flow. No, you're adding it back. So I think it's okay to look at free cash flow, because otherwise, if you expense capital expenditures, you're expensing it twice, so it's already coming out of free cash flow. So I think that's fine. But you do have to maintain that by spending capital expenditure. But that's not a big deal because we are doing it this way. So anyway, think about it this way. This property, plant, and equipment is a one-time purchase. Okay? So you have $2 billion, but this $2 billion is giving you $1 billion every year. Like imagine a 50% return hedge fund or something. You spend $2 billion once. I clean up $1 billion this year, $1 billion next year, $1 billion next year, $1 billion maybe in perpetuity. Well, it's your job to model, is it in perpetuity or not? But from a business owner perspective, this is like the greatest thing ever. From a stock market perspective, the stock is just what people are willing to pay for it. And they're willing to pay 14 times earnings for it, 14 times cash flow, EV to free cash flow. So for a non-grower and arguably business in tumult, that doesn't sound too cheap and it doesn't sound too expensive. I'm sort of attracted to it because 14 times is hard. It's kind of hard to get in most markets. But, in a downturn market, maybe that's 10 times, And then the question is if they can ever grow again, and it's not a business under siege, if they can ever grow again, it'd be a really, really big gainer. You could probably double your money if they're ever going to grow again. And that depends on your assessment of management. Are they good? Are they not so smart? You got to make up your mind on that. And that's not something that is simple. In fact, the best managements, you basically just have to look them in the eye. So my first big billionaire investor, I asked him how he did what he did. And he basically, with a Texas drawl, said, I look them in the eye. And if I like them, I buy. And if I don't like them, I sell. I thought it was the most profound shit I'd ever heard. And, it was, it's true though. It really is true. He wasn't an oil and gas guy, ironically. He became an oil and gas guy later. Actually, I think he kind of got washed on oil and gas in the shale boom. But in any event, that's not the point. The point is, he's right. That is sort of how you have to deal and assess management, because management's all you got at the end of the day for a lot of these companies. Not for every company. For some of these companies, you've got such a good brand and such a good, business that you can outlast management. And we all know Buffett's famous saying about that. But, for most of these businesses, you're really at the mercy of that CEO. And if they fuck up, you're cooked. So, you have to be pretty sure that you like the guy or gal running the business. And if you don't, it doesn't matter what the fuck the earnings ratios are, right? I mean,